Hello, thank you for joining us today on Matters of Substance. This is Carly, and I have Caitlin here with me as well today.
Hello.
Hi, Caitlin. How are you?
Good.
Great. So we have a very special guest. These are two of our coalition members who are just wonderful team members for us, and they have so kindly gone to something called CADCA as representatives of our coalition. And so I'm going to give Scott Jansen and Todd Willis a moment to introduce themselves and share why they're here, why they're part of the coalition, and what they learned at this amazing seminar. Scott, why don't you take it away?
Sure. Hey, good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are listening to this at this time. It's great to be here today. I'm a member of the Porter County Substance Abuse Council coalition, and have been doing that, attending that coalition for the last 4 years. And what I've noticed is, as we attend this coalition, we look to be effective in the field of, providing better resources for the community and better ways for prevention and treatment options to help those who are suffering. We have found that the communication amongst our coalition members and our vision and our objectives and our goals can make us and help us to be more effective in our efforts, as many times we can work in silos for the separate sectors, helping the people within their sectors. And so I believe that when this opportunity for CADCA came up, which was an opportunity to learn more about strengthening coalitions and looking at the strengths we have and also looking at the areas where we need to improve. And so this was a wonderful opportunity that Porter County Substance Abuse Coalition allowed for myself and Todd Willis to travel and learn more about what's needed to be done. And certainly Todd is an outstanding member in the community of Porter County and very busy and active and always looking for solutions and help. It was my great honor to attend this conference with him, learn from him, and work together in collaboration to find the tools that we need as a coalition to help us improve and be better. Todd?
Yeah. So, Scott, thanks for that. My name is Todd Willis. I work for Porter Stark Services. I'm the Director of Community Engagement there, and I have been attending coalition meetings for, 10 years, 11 years, 12 years, something. And so definitely seen a lot of the good work that the coalition's doing in the community. Why am I participating in that is I really do feel like this group of people really does want to make a difference in the community around obviously prevention, but they're tied into helping with treatment and recovery as well. And so, of all the things that I give my time to, this is one of my I feel like the most important groups because it does, Scott. It gets everybody together. It breaks down some silos, and really we're actively looking at what we're doing, what the coalition's doing, and trying to make a dent in this issue. Which brings us to the CADCA, right? So how I got involved with that. Carly, you had approached me and hey, would you be interested in attending the CADCA conference? And honestly, I had no idea what CADCA was about prior to that. And so obviously did a little research and really found out much more of the process when Scott and I went down. And really, for the listener, why this is important is these are the big bangers, as I like to call them, in the nation on how to form a group of people, a coalition, and to get stuff done. These are national, a national organization. And CADCA is that it's called the Community Anti-Drug Coalitions of America. And so when Scott and I went down, we, it was a week. And we were thinking, I don't know what you were thinking, Scott, but I was thinking, okay, I'm going to sit in this conference for a week and maybe zone out a little bit, and maybe they'll tell me some things I already know. And that's not what this was about. It was very active. There is homework that was associated with it, teaching that Scott and I have had to do, bring back things to the coalition. And we have two more sets, if you will, of going down there and turning in product that has to be evaluated. There's a certification, again, big bangers, man, certification process for our coalition. And so I was just really a little bit overwhelmed initially in that process of when they started talking about like what needs to be in place for a good coalition to work, but also happy that this coalition has been going for many years and had a lot of that stuff in place. There's some tweaks that we'll maybe even talk about on this podcast, but it was incredibly helpful. And just for those that are involved in the work of the coalition, getting to spend a week with Scott Jansen, that is awesome as well. He's a great dude, and I knew him just in terms of coalition work, but I'll say this for the listener as well. He, despite living and working in Chicago, he is very vested in what happens in Porter County, and not just from hey, I go to these meetings. This was another example of just digging into things we need to change here. And so I want to say that out loud. I really appreciate your heart and your work. You are always present for things that have to get done in the coalition, and so this is just another example. So I think we're going to spend some time talking about some takeaways from the conference. Is that right, ladies?
That's right. We want to know what did you learn? What are we bringing back to the coalition?
Yeah. So a big part of really what we learned was not just about the CADCA and what their goal is, which is basically to be a support to us and a checks and balance, for some of our moving parts, but really looking at are we making a difference in what we're doing with prevention and the anti-drug piece. And so a lot of the experience was looking at the history of prevention. So this first week was really, I'm going to give you an overview of what prevention is and was, and why we want to do that is because we want to make certain that you have the most up-to-date knowledge on what's working, right? And kind of an overview was then to bring us back to what do we need to be thinking about in terms of a good prevention model for Porter County and all the components that are there. So, Scott, you may remember the discussion on just when they had us think about and break us into groups about what kind of where we graduated and what was the prevention models that we remember. So like you and I, different high school graduating classes, different locations of the United States. But it was interesting. Do you remember that discussion of when they broke us down and some of the things that we learned from that ongoing, what was happening? What were the drugs that were being used during your time? Who used them? And in terms of how it was attacked at that time. Do you remember some of that discussion?
Yeah, I do. And in fact, I forgot to mention at the top of the conversation in my introduction, so I'm a business development coordinator with Gateway Foundation out of Chicago, but as Todd said, very vested in what happens in the community.
For sure.
I think any opportunity to help anybody in the recovery process is a passion that I have. And what we learned in that discussion was the scare tactics of the past are not what's really working today, whether that was DARE, whether that was Scared Straight, whether that was showing, movies in classrooms that were horrific, trauma-producing incidents.
The blood flows red on the highway, or whatever that was.
That's right, that one. And so by learning some of what the audience remembers and what we're doing differently today, I think that allows us to kind of look through, if you remember, flow charts, that good fun stuff, and producing models that we can effectively implement. It was a great discussion. I certainly learned a lot, and daunting, I think, is a good word for the material that was presented. But Todd?
Yeah, see, all of this comes from, certain time periods, right? Like the prevention model really started back in the 50s, right? This is when, if you think about the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, war on drugs, like each of those decades tried to hit it a different way. And just for why are we talking about this? Because as we look at what the coalition is doing, Are we modeling some of this stuff in the programs we're supporting? Are we, when we look at what the coalition is funding, are we like looking at what the research says is most effective? That's a big part that I gathered. And, one of the things as I talk about this with people, is that we all have experiences, right? And when I talk about, and we learned about certain prevention strategies, there were people in the room that were like, oh, that worked for me. Wonderful. Maybe a scare tactic did work for you. But what we see is, and when we say a technique is not necessarily effective anymore, is we're talking overall. And so what I'm learning is people hold very tightly to some of these techniques. They get a little feisty when you start going, well, let's look at Red Ribbon. And I support Red Ribbon. I love Red Ribbon. I love what it stands for. I think there's important messages to be given with that. But if we look at the data, what we're seeing is it's not as effective as maybe even it used to be. And so when I start talking about that, sometimes people get a little irritated. And all I'm doing is looking at the data. So, they walked us through this timeline, in the 50s and 60s, it was all about scare tactics, right? And where they saw the problem with drugs was in the ghettos, in the bad places of the world, right? Remember this discussion, Todd or Scott? And then, in the late 60s, we have this shift, that drugs, the perspective on drugs was it was used to intensify life. Like there's this, a psychedelic experience, right? And so information was the prominent way to hit that. If I give out enough information about the drug, it will cause people to stop using. And there were films, there were speakers. In the 70s, we get into, specific drug education. Here's how I'm going to prevent it. I'm going to tell people what cocaine is, what it does, and that'll make people stop. What I'm getting at is, we know because we're in, 2022, it hasn't stopped. And this problem I know is more complicated than just a magical prevention approach. But, when we get to the 80s, and we start getting into research. Oh, we better get with, evidence-based techniques. And so when the 2010 came, and really is where we're kind of still hanging on in 2022, was this strategic prevention framework. That if you're going to hit this drug problem, and this is what CADCA is encouraging, or CADCA is encouraging us to look at as a council, you have to hit this from multiple approaches. You remember the design, Scott, where they're like, okay, there's an assessment part, okay? You have to have some type of evaluation on what you're doing and what we're doing in the community to see if it works. Implementation's a part of that. Planning is another part. And then capacity, looking at our coalition and where we need to improve. And so the conference really was about working through that. And for the listener, you can look up SAMHSA's strategic prevention framework, and you'll see it. It's a series of 5 bubbles, if you will, that we're supposed to kind of be tackling. And that was the biggest takeaway, I think, from the week. So we started through that, right? We looked at our assessments. Like, how do we know in Porter County what the problem is? You guys, the coalition has purpose areas, drug issue problem areas. How do we know that that's where we're still at? And remember, there was discussion about, doing an assessment and how that might change or need to be done again post-COVID. Do you remember that discussion, Scott? Where, like, if you've done your prevention beforehand, or your assessment beforehand, COVID has kind of changed that for a little bit. That really made sense to me.
Yeah, I think I do remember that. And before I forget, I just want to say also for the listener, obviously if you're listening, you're somebody who cares enough what happens in Porter County, and are we providing solutions for prevention? And if you think about the commercial, this is your brain on drugs.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's what I had growing up, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what was sent my direction, right?
Exactly. And I had the same thing. And looking at that today, I would say, well, my brain doesn't look anything like that. And my brain on drugs, I'm not sure. And if we played that today, right, how effective would that be from a coalition standpoint of approach for prevention? So I think to Todd's point, what we're learning in CADCA as two representatives going down, obviously 70 people from the membership of the coalition can't travel at the same time, but at the end of the day, the hope is to bring back some of this information like the evaluation, the community assessment, and the planning so we can provide some opportunities for more engagement. Because I think people want to be involved. People want to make a difference, but sometimes it's easy to sit on the sidelines to say, well, when is the game going to start? Okay, and I think what we bring back are going to be opportunities to say, here's how you get involved, because everybody has a talent and everybody has value to bring. It's just our objective to try to bring a model that can show people, based on current research, not old information, how we can move forward as a coalition and be more effective, to Todd's point, with data, something that's data-driven that works.
Yeah, that was a big point, Scott, of that we, in that first round looked at our coalition makeup. It was interesting to hear other, I think there were how many other different coalitions were there? Maybe 12, 13 different groups of different coalitions. And they all had different issues in terms of their coalition makeup. Some coalitions had a hard time getting anybody there, period. Some got people there but couldn't get them actually engaged. Some got engagement from different sectors. And what I mean by sectors is, typically, and we'll talk about that, what makes a good coalition is you got several different voices. Maybe you have the police voice, or you have the provider voice, or you have, consumers. So having all those sectors, it was interesting to see that some of our problems other coalitions were dealing with. Some have overcome those. But a big part of it was look at your coalition and where are the holes? And then, in terms of people that we need that are not at the table. And also, when you get them to the table, how do you get them to actually get output? Because we're all busy. We all care, right? But we're not getting paid to be a part of any of this work. And we have our full-time jobs, and everyone else does too. But then how do you, when you get the people there, how do you tell your coalition story in a way that new members are coming on and they wanna engage in stuff, and the stuff actually works? That was CADCA. That was week one of CADCA.
Yes.
It's interesting as you look at our coalition. A good coalition has representation from, law enforcement. I think we're really strong in law enforcement.
Yeah.
Our police departments are, I've been in a couple task force meetings where it's law enforcement and one other, they come.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's also healthcare providers. How do we have healthcare? Scott and I would fall under that from a substance related, but do we have doctors and hospital and those kind of pieces, right? Religious organizations. One of the cool things that I think is really growing in just from my perspective, is the faith-based subcommittees that you guys have gotten out. Faith is a part of that, and Rich Schmidt has been a part of that, and getting the churches involved. But the faith community, youth serving organizations, are they at our table? Schools, businesses. Why would you want businesses at a substance abuse round table or coalition?
Substance abuse impacts
Yes.
every aspect of life, businesses as
does.
well.
Right.
We have
For
to
sure.
be able to advocate for people too, right? So if we have businesses at the table, then they're going to hopefully stigmatization might drop a bit for people who are living in recovery or actively in addiction. You know, we need to reduce those stigmas and help people get hired. I mean,
Exactly. That's what Todd said. You know, people in recovery, businesses can reduce the stigma and help us create knowledge about recovery, hire people, you know, make sure, you know, they are looking for jobs. They are great employees. They can make great employees.
I mean, do you know how hard you guys do because you work in the field? But I don't know if your average listener knows how hard it is for someone that is in recovery, that is, you know, progressed from their active addiction and trying to live a better life to get a job and get a meaningful job.
Right.
It's very challenging because of some of those stigmas. And so you're stuck working some, you know, very oftentimes very difficult physical labor job that doesn't pay well, doesn't give you benefits, and because of the financial struggles, it's all part of that cycle, right? So getting businesses to the table. And so what this created in Scott and I was just like, well, if we're weak in any of these areas, you know, another area, youth coming to the coalition meeting. Like if we're weak in some of those areas, how do we need to tell our story different? How do we need to engage that population in a way where they're like, or we can make the pitch that how important they are? Because, you know, we've done that with police. We've done that with, you know, I think for the most part, you know, healthcare and volunteer organizations. What about state and local government? So, like, I mean, I don't want to. I definitely see the flyers coming around, you know, my house now of, you know, vote for this person, getting that in the mail. And I sometimes see those folks at certain times, but man, like all this legislation around, like one of our problem areas is marijuana, right? We've kept that. Wouldn't it be interesting to get state representation there on the regular to hear when you have these presentations from I love this group and I forget their name every time.
Smart approaches to marijuana.
Smart approaches to marijuana. Yes, very nice, Carly. But like, if for the listener, if you want to like get into the research on marijuana and its the process of this legalization and what's really happening, Google smart approaches to marijuana, and like you'll get a different narrative than what's kind of out there in our culture right now, and you'll be equipped with science, which is important to kind of also have those conversations. So like, you know, it's stuff like that is where are we weak as a coalition, and how do we change the dialogue and start to motivate some folks a little bit differently.
Yeah. And let me say to that, because I think it's important, you know, one of the things that I think we came away with for sure is that we have a coalition team of leaders that includes Carly and Caitlin and certainly Dawn Pelk and Jay and, you know, doing some wonderful work and,
for sure.
and committees and,
Yep.
and just really being busy with wanting to make a difference. And that's attractive. That can attract people to want to be part of that solution. And I think, you know, it's easy to talk about the problem. We can all talk about the problem and point to what's wrong. But what we're trying to do with going to CADCA and coming back with information is say, here's the solution. How many people want to be on board here, and what can we do to make a difference? Because one final thing I'll say before I pass it back to Todd is that we did learn that a lot of our members are doing some really great work.
For sure.
And in terms of meeting with some of the other coalitions and hearing from these other 12 to 14 coalition people that were their members from all across the United States, we did learn that we have a really strong representation, but at the same time, we can always see some need for improvement and more engagement, like the faith-based initiatives that are taking
sure.
place. Tomorrow we have a luncheon and a presentation, and the last one that took place, we had many members of the community, listeners that are listening right now, show up to this event. And why is that important? Because leaving with more education, better informed, and what to do and how to help can really make a difference, because it's not a one-person job. It's the we, it's the group, and that force is stronger, I think, in the community to really make change and be effective. So this is some good stuff we're learning.
For sure.
But we can't implement it alone, for sure, and neither can the Porter County Substance Abuse Council by themselves. So we need help, and we need engagement, and hopefully our talk today is going to inform you that we've got some really great information that we'd love for you to be part of and be willing to share more as we go along with the progress that we're making.
And Scott, if I can piggyback off that, I think, what we have done so far, Scott and I did 2 presentations, and we're allotted so much time at each coalition meeting to talk about this stuff, but it's not coming from a place of judgment. I really felt like in a lot of ways we were ahead of a lot of the other coalitions that were there. But I am presenting very assertively and clearly, like really some of our areas that need to change. Like, for instance, we have a lot of great partners that come to the table, but when it comes to a lift, sometimes I see you guys there. And that's your job. Well, yeah, that's your job. But like you can't do all of these initiatives by yourself. And I know everybody, man, I'm busy, but as I look at like why I am coming to those meetings is I need to make a difference in Porter County. For me, it's for my kids. Like, this is where I live. And if I need to free up some time to help, some evidence-based practices to get underage drinking down, that's going to help my kids, right? All the networking is great, but really for me, it's about, at the end of the day, I want to involve myself with things that work and that make a difference. And so, I do see you guys at all of the stuff. And there's some great pictures circulating out there from some of the events. Hit me up on Facebook. I'll be happy to pass those along to any of your listeners. But that being said, you're right, Scott. Like, we can't do all this alone. And that's where the actual members from the coalition make a difference. Yeah, absolutely. The other neat part of this was looking at, and this is a part of the strategic framework, right? The implementation thing. So just kind of break this down is like they want us to like, hey, you have your current problem areas. Are those still where you want to land? Well, and what was interesting to me is when I asked the coalition that, I asked them, do they know what our problem areas are? And nobody raised their hand. I didn't know what our problem areas were until I went down and I was seeing the plans and that's not judgment, okay? That's like, well, wait, what are we doing? Like, if you don't know the problem areas that the group you're participating in is trying to target, how are you ever going to, like, any of your time going to be useful, right? And so, they want this community assessment really is just to define and describe the community and get an analysis of what the problem areas are. Now, you guys did an excellent, this is what makes our job easy, is a lot of that is done. You did an extensive data pull from the problem areas. The one thing that's interesting to me is that was done prior to COVID, and COVID has flipped the script, if you will, on everything. I hate to keep talking about COVID, but like it's changed everything. And so I wonder if some, a minor tweak here or an area we can look at post-COVID, if some of our areas of focus might need to shift. I don't know. Are opioids still the problem, that they were in 2020? Yes, but if you look at some of the data, some of that's decreasing. I mean, people are still dying, yes. But what are we seeing, right? And then they want you to evaluate, define the problem, conduct a problem analysis, and update your assessment. Then they want you just to gather information. Well, where do we get our information on this? Well, we get it from coalition members. We get it from, hey, Porter Stark, how many people have you treated in the last year for opioid issues? Hey, police, how many arrests have taken place and da-da-da-da? Hey, Scott, can you, right? So you're gathering that. And then once you have that, then you pick your strategies. You pick your and what are those strategies? They got to have research behind them. Then we actually take a look at like, oh, okay, who's going to pull it off? Who's going to pull it off? Where do we need to develop our coalition in ways to kind of get people to run with that? And then we look at the data and see if any of it's working. If it's not, we switch.
And I think to that point, we have to be, as a coalition, we have to be aware that there's going to be change coming, right? Like, that's
Right.
a hard thought. Like, man, like you said, people want to stick to what they've done. You know, we've done Red Ribbon for 20 years or whatever.
And the red ribbon is a great thing. Okay, I don't want to, but
It's just an easy one to pull because
Right.
we know about it, right?
But does
'Cause
it-
it's been done so long. 'Cause
is
we
the
know about
evidence
it.
there to support that it's working?
Exactly. And that's the shift we have to make, you know. If we're not choosing strategies that are impactful and effective, then we're doing a disjustice to the community, really.
Right. And I think it's hard because, yes, there are a lot of strategies that we do that are one and done. And unfortunately, the research does show in the prevention world that those are the least effective, if not actually kind of harmful to do. And knowing that we partake in some of those activities, not because we're intentionally trying to
Right.
not make a difference, but because that's what we've known. And it's really about finding innovative, evidence-based practices and introducing them, but then sticking with them. I feel like
Right.
sometimes when we get any kind of pushback or something, we're like, okay, let's just throw in the towel. But really trying to see it through and give it a period of time to evaluate the data. But yes, I think like Todd said, I think we've got the people. We can collect the information. We have willing organizations. It's that part of, okay, what are we going to do and who's going to contribute to help?
Right.
And then taking it from there. We're always kind of stuck in that one part.
And thank you for several of those points. It's reminding me of some discussions we had down there. Like, we're not just stuck. Other coalitions have this same issue, and what we've got to try to do in ours is push through that. And you did mention the overwhelming research on these one and done strategies, right? Like, they're easy to pull off. It makes us feel like we are doing something. People want to feel like they're doing something, but you're right. Like, they're just not that effective in moving the needle, So it is, none of this is easy. None of this is easy, which is why, substance abuse is still, or misuse is still a problem.
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, and I think one thing I would add to that one and done is maybe this is a call to action for the listener to visit the website of the Porter County Substance Abuse Council and review some of the material that committees have worked so hard on. Parent awareness. We just put a packet together that there's a lot of information, right? And why did we do this as a coalition? Because we saw the issues with youth, looking at prevention. It's great to talk to law enforcement, but once somebody is in jail, they're in the problem. And certainly
Right.
we can help, but as we discussed before this meeting, prevention happens before. How do we educate? And these are some tools that we have on the website for Porter County Substance Abuse Council as a project that was done. But perhaps, how do people become members of the coalition? It's not mysterious. It doesn't take a certain credentialing.
It is a super elite group, though. I mean, for the listeners that want to get involved, it's the closest thing to having your superpowers, Scott.
This is true. And if you show up, not only will you get coffee and donuts, but more importantly, you might find ways that you can be involved, you can be effective, and truly bring something to the table, because because I think, as we've said before, whether it's somebody running in a state office or whether it's an employer, we do need more people to come to the table. But again, not taking anything away. I'm so grateful that I am part of this coalition, because I belong to 4 different coalitions throughout Illinois, including this coalition, and I see this coalition doing the most work and the most engagement. So
thank you.
Yes, and Todd Willis leading many of these efforts along with Carly and Caitlin.
It's smoke and mirrors, brother.
But truly, I did want to make that point, because I think if we do have 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 people listening, I mean, what a great audience, what a captive audience to say, check out the website. When's the last time you've done that?
Yeah.
As well as learn about when the meetings are coming. If you do want to be part of this conversation, because Todd and I will be going to Tampa for week 2 in the next 2 weeks, and then there's a 3rd week in September. And, I'm just happy that here's a family man, he's got children and he's got a job, but he's committing 4 days and travel time to and from. And as Todd mentioned, what do we do there? We're not just sipping on coffee and eating bagels. It's 8 a.m. to 4:30. It's nonstop, and it's a lot of work. It's a lot of information, and I'm just happy that my partner here is, he can decipher a lot of this information, because he is a teacher and he does a lot of presentations, and he can package it, in a way that, at least for someone like myself, I can understand it and I can learn how I can be involved. And so, that's just some of the insight into, some of the things that we are doing, and I'm sure there's more you want to talk about. So,
well, thanks, Scott. Well, 2 of the things that, I think were eye openers for me, because we talked about it in a different way, was first off, looking at a big part of this process is looking at your community in terms of resource, and not is there a mental health center, or is there a gateway, or is there, but what is unique about our community that no other community has, that we need to try to factor into this discussion. And a lot of discussion was on these natural resources, say what you want about Northwest Indiana, but I choose to live here, and I choose to live here for a reason. It is a good place to raise a family. Schools are very good in this area. Cost of living, and property taxes, although those just went up, but are very, reasonable. We have the dunes, a place that nowhere else in the United States had. When we look at this problem, okay, and we need more therapy, or we need prevention, or we also need to be looking at how our community is uniquely situated in terms of, we already do that in terms of the problems, right? We know that there's a major 8094 that goes through our area, lots of, but what are the natural resources we have that we need to also pull in? The parks department, the number of churches in Porter County, because all of that, as we're looking at how to get people to, when they experience strong emotion or trauma, not to turn to those negative coping skills, have to be a part of the discussion. So that's one thing I'm just throwing to you guys, and maybe we can talk about that if you want. The other was the discussion on, are there norms in our community that are present that make substance abuse in some areas okay?
Yes.
Are there some community norms? And I'll just tell you from a personal standpoint, and I beat this drum long enough, so I'll just hit it and then I'll move on. In general, people want a presentation on drugs. They're more than willing to talk about opioid. They're more than willing to talk about meth, because that's coming up, in terms of spike numbers. They're more than willing to talk about prescription drugs. We need to do something about these problems. They're more than willing to talk about youth underage drinking. But the minute I start talking about alcohol, Scott Jansen, and start talking about what in our community, what are the norms around drinking? I just took one. Think about all the other community norms around drug use. Do we have norms in our communities that kind of put alcohol in a different category? And I think the way you can look at that, and look, we're all adults. Adults can make their own choices and be responsible with, what they choose to put in their body. But if you look at the events that really draw, look on our calendar. Summertime's a great time to kind of look at what's happening in Porter County. Count how many of those are involving alcohol of some kind, and then you got to look at what is the norm behind that. That was an eye opener for me. Those two areas of like, we're not just talking about trying to teach kids that drugs are bad. There are other norms that in our community, and not just our community, but other communities, that make the discussion harder. I don't know if you guys have any feedback about either one of those areas.
One thing I'll say is that before I started this job here at the council, I didn't really quite understand the impact of norms in our community and even within my own family dynamics, right? So I thought back to when I have a child, I was thinking, what does that look like for me raising that child? What are the things we're going to do as a family? And when I got here, I realized alcohol is usually used as a celebration. I would say that's probably a norm throughout most of our community. Okay, are we having a high school graduation? Is there going to be beer there? Did somebody get married? Is there going to be an open bar? Mm-hmm. Most of our celebrations have alcohol involved.
For sure.
And to me, I'm not saying that's necessarily wrong or bad, but we do have to think about that.
It's a piece of the puzzle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Do we need to have beer at a high school graduation? Are we really, is that something, an area we feel it's really important,
Be careful.
Yeah.
You're treading on, right? But really, you start
yeah.
talking that and people like, they glaze, some folks glaze over at you like,
Yeah.
don't you come for my,
Right, for sure,
I'm not coming for anybody's stuff, but
Right.
it's a part of the discussion.
And we have to be honest about those pieces, right? We can't pretend that they don't exist, because if we do, then we're not really servicing the youth. We're not going to make that needle move, as Todd kept saying, if we don't address everything.
Well, right. And how many times out of 10? At least 8 or 9 times out of 10. Now, while someone may use alcohol as a youngster, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to progress into using heroin or methamphetamine.
For sure.
9 times out of 10, people will kind of start with alcohol, cigarettes, marijuana, and that's sort of like an initiation of sorts into the world of, mood and mind altering substances.
For sure.
And so it is so important, but it severely gets neglected in the conversation as alcohol.
Well, and you just brought up cigarettes, and nicotine. You're right. There's not a direct correlation between alcohol and cigarettes, and if you're going to use opioids. But I don't know any folks that have personally, and I've worked with a lot of people that I don't know anyone that has an opioid addiction that does not also in their history have struggled with nicotine or alcohol. I don't know. I'm sure it happens, but you're right. It's something to think about. And that whole issue around nicotine. You've had, I'm sure, Carrie Higgins talk about all of that stuff and how it looks like the research is showing that less people are smoking, which is great. Less youth are smoking. But they've switched. They've moved into this whole vaping piece, and I don't want that to kind of take center stage, but it is a part to now we're shifting into this vaping, and the chemicals are still there, worse, and we're putting things into those things. So what's our culture on vaping? What's the norms on vaping? It's starting to change, but there was a norm that they were originally sold as tobacco prevention tools.
Yeah.
My father, who has since passed, was a longtime smoker, and I remember when the old time e-cigarettes, right? They look like a little cigarette, and they light it up on the end, and he had one of those, and I'm like, Dad, what are you doing? And he's like, I got this because I'm trying to stop smoking. They were sold as here, this is better than, and it's just a multitude of lies. But those are norms that are in our society around that stuff.
I'll say to vaping, just because I think it's interesting. I remember a time when it first came on the scene where people were kind of like competing, like of doing like tricks and stuff.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So it kind of made it like that fun, cool thing. And so when we're talking about norms, we have to remember, and when we're talking about substances, we have to remember that sometimes they can be commercialized in a way that seems fun and hip and the thing to do.
Cleaner.
Right.
A lot of
sure.
I've come in contact with are like, ew, no, not cigarettes.
Right.
Ew, no needles.
This is just vapor. It smells fruity. It's, all of that stuff that I know we've talked about. Look at, how just, one of our problem areas, marijuana. We've talked about alcohol, which is another one. Of youth underage drinking is another problem area that we focused on. But let's move to marijuana. Like, what are we seeing norm-wise in our communities around marijuana? Like, we're seeing it as, well, it's natural. It's used, it's got effectiveness for anxiety, pain relief. All of those things, and I don't want to get into the research either way, but those are norms that are going to make it very challenging for us to hit one of our problem areas, which is marijuana use.
Well, and certainly now because we have legalization on either side of us in our specific spot in Indiana, we have states who have legalized on either side, so that norm is kind of creeping into the attitudes, it seems, in our community.
For sure.
And I would add to that because I think it's important, right? We're talking about a lot of problems, and once again, I think the purpose of this podcast is, for people to be aware of maybe what we're doing on the ground and trying to make a difference. But Todd brought it up, and so did you and Carly and Caitlin. I'd ask the listener to think about, where do you think the problems are? Mm-hmm. What is the problem? And, what is it based on, family experience? And maybe you have a sibling, a spouse, a child, that struggles in any of these areas or has some exposure and you'd like something to be done. I think when something horrible happens and, to bring this back to, the underlying issue, which this is, these issues gone untreated without any solutions can literally lead to death. And I think to Todd's point, post-COVID, or are we still in the midst of this 2-year-long change that we're all learning to adapt to, we're seeing rise in mental illness and mental health issues, and especially in the youth.
For sure.
We're seeing suicide, rising. Vaping and some of these behaviors, this isolation as opposed to connection with other people and their schoolmates. And so what's being done here, and maybe that's where we think about, if the employer is coming to the table, we're not going to stop alcohol at a fest because moderation is one thing, but intoxication
for sure
is another. And so maybe we have, as we have in some of the fests I've attended here, we've done community scans from this coalition, and we've noticed the open alcohol versus the areas where it's a space that is clearly they're going to be serving alcohol. And I'll finish with this point. Being from Illinois and where we see legalization, I was at a outdoor fest the other night, and my godchild and his mother, they wanted to come and enjoy the music and the band, which seemed natural and innocent.
For sure.
And I said, I don't think that will be a good idea. Why? Because it's an environment that I knew, based on the timing of the event, the fact that I was at a festival the week before and noticed the amount of marijuana in the air. And would this be good for a 6-year-old boy whose mother wants
norms? What is it? What is it showing? That what becomes normal to that population? So whether you're 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, that's what we're getting at.
Exactly. And the point being, here is a mother that might have needed the education, which was for me directly to say, the event I was at last week, here's what happened. I don't think this would be a good idea, but maybe something in the afternoon with a different venue. Now, I could have easily said, sure, bring them along, it will be great. And maybe this young little boy would have had some exposure to the smell, to saying, what is that? And it would have been a dangerous environment for a young person to be. And it's an extreme example. It's 6 years old. But I think it's an example to, bring some awareness to, because Carly, with your newest arrival, certainly, and anybody else who has children, and Todd, and for his children, and anybody living in the community, you want to be able to go places and know that it's safe, and know that you're not going to be having some message presented to you that's going to, be a toxic message that could put you, family members, children at risk.
Yes, for
and
sure.
So what do we do? And that, I think, is
Right.
part of what we're doing
Well,
here.
that's the work of the coalition, is how do we start to examine, educate ourselves. I love talking about marijuana because it challenges me and my thought process, in terms of what's helpful and what's not, and it always brings out a spirited discussion. But when you look at norms, right? I haven't been to Chicago lately. Driving when we left. And this isn't an Illinois thing. This is like a world thing. Crossing the Indiana line right after we get into Illinois, there's all these, and I was like, oh, look at the world we are in. These we'd welcome you to Illinois. And what an interesting time we live in. Like, that's a norm, and that will be Indiana at some point. And maybe there's some listeners that are like, I can't wait. But see, these are the things we need to talk through and be thoughtful of, because what we are seeing with any substance, I'm drinking caffeine right now, any substance, there are effects that go on a molecular level with ingesting different substances and the amounts that you put in. And so we've got to be looking at, norms around caffeine. Yes, drive harder, work harder, get less sleep. If you're tired, just slam a caffeine. What am I doing to my body as a result of that? See, those are norms that we have as a culture that if we're going to address substances and substance misuse, we've got to provide a different narrative.
I'll say to that point, and we're going to be coming to a close here pretty soon, but I just really appreciate, what is that doing to your body, right? Like, it's a norm maybe in our community to do whatever substance we're talking about, but what's it doing to our body? That needs to be a norm too. The norm needs to be, here's what is going on in your body as a result to this.
Well, and that's all fine and well, it is important. However, when it comes to young people, that's specifically something that they don't care about right now.
Sure.
But it'll eventually catch up to them. It'll catch up to all of us.
It always does.
It always
doesn't
does.
it?
But
we're living proof of that in this room.
right, and it's a good message to have, because I have learned that they do like wellness, and they're into that wellness space, and they want to kind of do things holistically in a sense, I've heard. But
for sure,
as far as what is it doing to your body? Well, it's not happening right now, Miss Caitlin. So, talk to the hand type of thing.
For sure.
It's still important.
Yeah. For sure.
Well, we only have about 5 minutes left.
5
Look at
minutes.
that.
This time flies when
So
you're with
fast.
friends.
It
That's
certainly
right.
does. Well, let me. And do you have any, Caitlin, Carly? I mean, obviously, we could talk all day about some of the things we're doing with the CADCA follow-up and what we're anticipating for the next week. I mean, is there anything maybe we've left out you think that would be important to address?
I got something. I do really want to say how we are so appreciative for Todd Willis and Scott Jansen. And, without these two very people, our coalition would not it wouldn't have thrived as much in the last couple of years. And
thank you.
And every coalition I know, I'm sure, has champions. And the important thing is, I don't think we can't expect everyone to be a champion, and not everyone can be. But when you've got two people, and there's a few other people that are real champions,
For sure.
I think it helps. Their leadership skills really helps the people who maybe aren't natural leaders to kind of keep trudging along. And but we are really just so grateful for specifically these two gentlemen here before us today.
Oh, thank you.
And
Appreciate it.
taking time out of your lives to go down to CADCA. I mean, yeah, that's a big thing, and it's not totally over yet. But you guys
we still have some assignments, Scott. We've got to get in.
That's right. That's right. Late
Reach
nights.
out and email. You guys want to go away for a week? Well, where am I going? What am I doing?
There is no free lunch. We have learned. But and to that point, I do want to say, if there are any coalition members listening, I think what's important is when I came to this coalition, I was coming to learn.
Yeah.
And, I could have been silent on the sidelines, but there were some opportunities to step into. And I do think, anybody we have in this coalition, everybody has a different skill set. And I think everybody's a star, and everybody can step off and step into their own power.
For sure.
and show up. And I'm certainly grateful that I have all the opportunities to be involved, and I have a passion to do that. And the hope is that perhaps in our next trip, and when we come back with the presentations, by identifying a little bit more focused and pointed, where our efforts need to be. Not that they're lost on anything we're doing today, but, perhaps we can, better measure, right, the effects of the programs that we have in place and do more of what's working and less of what's not. And I think this is a model and what we're learning at CADCA, the CADCA Academy, to bring these tools back and be more effective. So whether it's Carly taking your newest little one to the next event, or any one of us, enjoying the next fest that comes, and just feeling that something's changing, something's shifting. It feels more comfortable. It feels more safe. And that doesn't happen by magic or overnight. It happens because people are out there advocating for change. And I think that certainly with Todd's, I put this is the bromance happening, but certainly one of the things I learned about Todd is living in the community. How at one point he left for sort of personal reasons and discovery and education, and he's back because he sees this as a place that he's passionate about and loves this community and does everything that he does because he cares about the community. And to have somebody at the table that's in that position, working not for the money, but for the change is really fortunate, I think, for the coalition members. So thank you.
Thank you. And in closing, I'd like to say thanks, Dawn, for your leadership. Sometimes leading a coalition can be kind of political and, having to navigate people's interests. But she is wanting this information and is willing to change direction of things in a positive way. Other coalition leaders would probably fight some of this, but she is wanting to ingest this information and move us forward. So thanks for that leadership. Yeah. And thanks for the invite, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, well, I think that's a pretty natural end to the show. So thank you all for listening today, and we hope you listen again next week.
Farewell.
Thank you.